This is Curious Incident, a podcast for special needs families and your window into the world of special education. Parenting can be challenging, and we want to make it easier by providing you with the resources you need to best help your child. Let's delve deep into the world of special education with your host, Adam Dayan.
I am pleased to present my next guest on this podcast, Julia Paris. Julia is the associate principal at a private special education school in Brooklyn, New York, that provides students who have learning differences with small academic classes and individualized therapeutic instruction to help them complete a Regents curriculum and prepare for college and/or careers. Julia has been an educator and/or administrator for roughly 40 years. She has bachelor's degrees in reading as well as education and special education, and a master's degree in school building leadership. Julia, it's great to have you on the show today.
Great to be here.
Nice to see you in person.
You too.
Tell me a little bit more about you. What makes your approach or outlook unique given your particular background, skills, and experiences?
So I would have to say that after so many years, starting out as a teacher, then a principal in general ed, moving on to director of a elementary school special ed, and now in a high school, working in the classroom, behind the scenes, with parents, with the Board of Education. I have an overall perspective that I've gained over the years of seeing things from so many different aspects and understanding issues that were so different to me when I first began. I've just recently gone back into the classroom for a few periods, teaching a few classes, and I'm such a different teacher now, just understanding students, understanding parents' perspective, understanding constraints of a school, understanding teacher struggles, that it's just a journey and a passion.
That's wonderful. You've worn a lot of different hats. You've been in many different kinds of settings.
Yeah, I have, and each one has been a stepping stone. You know, I have a saying, when you feel you have nothing left to learn, it's time to retire. So we're always learning.
So tell us a little bit more about the teaching experience that you have, and how would you compare your teaching experience to your experience as a school administrator?
My teaching experience now, knowing what I know, working one-on-one with students and in small groups, gives me a perspective, understanding really the needs of the students, the different struggles they're working with, what their parents would like to see as outcomes, what I know they can accomplish, understanding that the curriculum has to be changed up, has to move depending on how the students are feeling that day, their special needs. I usually have a really good rapport. It's pretty easy going in my class. Yesterday, for instance, I saw I wasn't getting through to the students. It was the middle of the day. It was warmer than usual. They were tired. And I actually shared with them. I said, okay, this isn't going anywhere. What should we do? And we changed it up. It was one of the drier ideas of understanding what a sonnet is with Shakespeare. So we wrote a silly sonnet. It wasn't Shakespearean, but and they started giggling and laughing, and I've known that I know now that we're not teaching a curriculum, we're teaching kids, and we have to fit to their learning styles and modalities. It's not so much that we teach, it's that they learn. And that's a big perspective. About halfway through my career, that shifted to really, really get that.
And I imagine that flexibility is something that you develop over time, right? The ability to tune into what's happening with your students and adapt based on how they're presenting or doing on a particular school day?
It is, and it's something that can be learned. Um, I especially love working with young teachers who are in school and learning the latest methodologies because they're very open um, to hearing and learning new ideas. And the first thing I teach them is teaching by backward design. Um, you
What do you
don't
mean by that?
you don't you don't start out thinking about what do I want to teach. You have to start out thinking, what do I want my students to be able to do when this lesson is over, when this unit is over? What can they produce? What can they visibly manage to convey that they have mastered the material? And doing that is you take a very different approach to how you prepare your lessons, to, just washing your hands and say, I taught it. And you have to do assessments at the end of your teaching, not so much even to test the children, but to test yourself and to see, did I get through to them? Is it one student struggling? Is everybody struggling? Did I just do a lousy job today? And be open and willing to say it didn't go well. I have to regroup and start over. And I also ask the kids. I tell them in advance, I'm accountable to you. By the end of the lesson, this is what I want you to be able to do. And at the end, I ask them, did we do that? Do you have it? And then I check it out.
Great. Julia, what's unique about the population you serve? Can you talk about the kinds of diagnoses and issues that the students you work with typically present with?
Yes. So our students generally have sat in general ed classes for the most part. They are intellectually intact students. They sometimes score nicely on several assessments that are given on standardized testing. However, when they come into class, they're not performing as well. And it turns out that some of it, when we dig deeper into testing, is due to ADHD. Some of it is due to speech and language impairments. Some of it is due to reading disabilities that these kids present as every other kid in a classroom, and it was really hard to detect, and they were labeled as lazy, or because their performance is variable. Sometimes they can score well, peaks and valleys, then they go down to low grades, and then they'll pick it up again. And, people have told them for years, if only you would try harder, you're capable, you can do it. And these poor kids are on a treadmill, running a marathon, without people realizing. And at some point, some of them give up. And our teachers don't realize it. Parents don't realize it. And some of these kids wind up failing, both academically, they feel like failures, when actually, if they had the right interventions, the right environment, they can succeed above and beyond their peers in many instances.
What you mentioned before, if only you would try harder, is such a common theme, unfortunately. I mean, I've heard it so many times on this podcast. I've read it so many times in neuropsychological evaluations. I've heard it so many times in teachers' testimony or parents' feedback. And I think it's really important to underscore that it's not always about trying harder. Sometimes there's a mix of issues at play. And I want to ask you about the mix of issues you just discussed. You talked about ADHD, speech and language issues, reading difficulties, and you spoke earlier about the evolution of your thinking or perspective. So has your thinking or understanding of these issues or the way they interact with each other evolved over the course of your career?
So, way back when I started out in a classroom and a child was having issues, we would refer them. Then it was the Board of Education. Today it's the Department of Education, but we would refer them for testing. And they would come back with speech and language services. And my administrator and I would look at each other, or even when I became an administrator in that school, would look at each other and say, they're not lisping, they're not stuttering. Why are they getting speech and language delays? And we throw our hands up in confusion. And then, you learn and evolve. And I don't think we identified as much that there were these disabilities, or nobody explained it in college or in your master's. And then when I started working with speech and language populations and speaking to speech and language therapists, I learned that it's the way you process information. And that means students, children, people, adults can have a receptive language disorder, which is how you take in information. Sometimes it's too many words, too much stimuli at a time. It's just an overload, and the brain of someone with a receptive language delay can't grab it all in the usual methodology of chalk talk or lecture or copy notes. Some people have expressive delays where they're able to take in the information, but it's almost like if you think of the brain as a file cabinet, they can't retrieve the correct file to bring the information out and express it. And what happens is they either, when they're not getting the information in and they come home and, I as a parent sometimes would say, were you in class today? Did you, what did you learn? I don't know. And
To your own children, you mean?
to my own children, right. I speak today not only as an educator, but as a parent of children who, when they did go through mainstream schools, but had these struggles. And somewhere in the middle of my career, I was able to say, aha, that's what's going on, and have the knowledge of being able to take them for testing, which is prohibitive in price. It's expensive, but it is the best gift and money you can spend on your child, because it gives you a blueprint of exactly what your child is challenged with, what their strengths are, how to compensate, how to accommodate. And sometimes schools don't even know how to use it. So as a parent, you have to be able to there's usually a summary page, or really understand, or go to an expert and have them explain it to you. So when you go to parent-teacher conferences and the teacher says, your daughter isn't taking notes, you can look at it and you can look at them and say, well, look at this report. It says she can't pay attention and take notes at the same time. She needs a copy of notes.
And the testing and report that you were just speaking about was a neuropsychological evaluation, correct?
Yes.
I think it would be helpful for our listeners to understand a little bit more about what happens inside of your classrooms. Can you talk a little bit about that? What are you doing inside of your classrooms to help students who have language-based learning disabilities, ADHD, reading challenges, and speech and language issues?
Okay, so we spoke about receptive and expressive language delays. Just to briefly give an overview, ADHD can run a gamut. We originally think of ADHD as a kid who's all over the place, running around the room, and they can't sit in one place. So you do have the fidgety kid, and then you have the opposite. That's ADHD inattentive, where it's the daydreamy, hello, are you there kind of thing. Ironically, we say that we run around overdiagnosing people. So maybe many of us have little bits and pieces of it, But I mean, I actually remember sitting in class sometimes and all of a sudden like waking up and saying, uh-oh, I just missed a whole gamut of information. I was able maybe to bring myself back, make up the notes, but it was a little bit of a lost feeling. Imagine that you can't bring yourself out of that. So and then there are combined types. So you're sitting and fidgeting. Your legs are going up and down. You're making noises on the desk, which is annoying people around you. On top of that, the teacher is talking on and on and on to the point where it sounds like blah, 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 blah.
Like that Charlie Brown
I-
episode.
I didn't know how many people are old enough to remember that. Um, so, yes, kind of like that. And what we're able to do is we have related service providers that are employees of our program. They're not sent in isolation to give whatever services, that they provide. They work in collaboration with our program, with our teachers. And they're partners with our teachers, whether that's the school counselor, the speech and language therapist, the occupational therapist. We have an ABA professional who comes in, once a week and helps us touch base with things.
I'm just going to pick up on that. I think that's interesting because a lot of people think of ABA in the context of autism, but it's certainly not limited to that context, right? Because the ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis Professional, is, like you said, someone who, why don't I just let you say it? Can you help clarify,
Sure.
right? Outside of working with kids who have autism, which is not what your program is about, how does an ABA professional help kids who are dealing with the kinds of issues we've been talking about?
Okay, so very often it's many-fold, not twofold. It's various reasons. Some students who have sat in classes for so long, failing, turn into clowns, or have learned how to get positive negative attention, is what it's called, that you're getting that attention somehow, or you're deflecting. I don't know how to do this. This is too hard. What if they call on me? What's going to happen? What am I going to do? And they start acting out. Or there are avoidance things. I can't do the homework, so I'm just not going to do it. I can't sit in class this long, so I'm going to cause a disturbance and get kicked out. I need a break. So at an ABA, when it gets to be an overwhelming problem, and the child, also students with ADHD, sometimes are dysregulated, and they don't know how to calm down, in their mind. So students sometimes need someone to set parameters for them, because it's almost, like what we've learned with 2-year-olds, the terrible twos that have temper tantrums, and we have to put, guidelines in. Students and kids and people need structure. So the ABA therapist helps the teacher recognize when a student, what is triggering a student, helps the student understand, what triggers them, what's expected of them, works together with a consult with the parent on how to follow through at home, and we work on 1 to 3. There might be 7 goals we need, but we'll work on 1 to 3, let's say, and we try to help the person themselves regulate themselves. If that doesn't work, we have the teachers, help them chart things, and it's a lot of hard work.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that. I think it's an important piece. What else happens in your classrooms?
So our classes are smaller to begin with. The target number is 10. Sometimes we have 9, sometimes we have 12. We'll put in another person once we go over 10. So that we do small whole group instruction, maybe 10 minutes. And then we can individualize based on needs into groups. A group can be 2, it can be 4, it can be someone who needs one-on-one for a little bit of time. We also use a multimodality approach, which basically means we try many different ways to get through the information that we want to convey. That can be through, again, lecture. We try to use interactive pieces, whether it's technology, PowerPoints, videos, games, educational games that teachers can create called Kahoot or Edpuzzle, which kind of scrambles the information and the children get to compete against each other. And sometimes I'll go running down the hallway into a classroom because there's screaming going on, and it's a Kahoot game. And that kind of excitement we love, where they're screaming and I think they're, like something happened and they're playing Kahoot. And then sometimes I'll stay and play with them. But we really try to make it relevant. If we see it's not working, we really work on metacognition for our students. And that basically is, we can give the kids a whole bunch of toolboxes of methodologies to use. Everybody needs a planner. Everybody has to look up, we have a homework spreadsheet. Everybody has to look up their work on the homework spreadsheet and make sure that, you have your work done, prepared. It's a way to check on what you have to do. But then, we noticed that some kids were doing their homework and really didn't want to use the homework spreadsheet or a planner, or, as technology came more into play, they wanted to use something online. And, again, that was an evolution over the last, I would say, 10 years of realizing, rather than me telling you what you need, here are a whole bunch of tools. You tell me what works for you and what you need and what doesn't work for you. Because ultimately, I'm working with a high school population now. We have 4 years, and then we send them out into the world, and they have to be independent learners. So we try to give them the tools in our classes to have all the pieces they'll need for whatever they choose to do after high school, whether it's academic, advocacy. One big piece is executive function. How do you organize your day? How do you get out of the house on time, get to class on time? How do you organize your materials so that you can find it? How can you study skills? So all of these pieces, together with the occupational therapist who will do executive function skills, and the speech and language therapist who can not only pull students out, but push in so that they're working in the classroom with a group of students, so that they're saying to the teacher, I noticed so-and-so really wasn't tuning in when you did this, try that. And it's such a partnership that the teachers seek out it's done in a non-threatening way, in a collaborative way, so that our teachers, kind of are glad to get the direction from them.
That's wonderful. And these are such important skills, such important life skills that we're talking about. The ability to advocate for yourself, to identify what works for you, so important.
Yes, it is. Sometimes the kids, we work on their writing skills, and I'll, push the point, and when you go to college, you're going to have to write essays. So, they get frustrated. I don't care if I pass the region. I don't want to take the region. And we'll say, whether you do or don't, we require them to, but, they're expressing their frustration. You're going to need this for life. I'm not going to college, but you're going to be doing something, and you're going to have to convey your ideas. We also do vocational work with them. In their senior year, they go out 2 mornings a week to do an internship in some area that they're interested in, and hopefully they can use that in their future careers. We have some kids that just completed a real estate course, and things like that. So we really are cognizant of the fact that we have these students for 4 years now. When I worked in elementary school, it was how do I prepare them for high school? Now it's like, okay, we have 4 years to prepare you for life.
Right.
And we try to hit, all the points that they'll need. We think about what skills will you need after life? How will you interview for a job? How will you present yourself, knowing how to dress even on an interview or for this kind of a job? Anything they might need.
Julia, what advice would you give to parents?
Oh, there's so much.
Let's do it.
Okay. The first thing to realize is that every child wants to do well in life. If you think back to a child learning how to walk, they don't get up and fall down and then give up and say, this is too hard, I don't want to do it anymore. They keep going at it. Our desire as humans is to do well. The question is, I don't know if this is, PC to say, when did we suck the joy of learning out of their lives? And for some kids, imagine you make a resolution, New Year's resolutions. I'm going on a diet, and you try it and you just don't succeed. Or I'm going to get up every morning and do, a run, or go to the gym, and you don't. And then your friends say to you, but you were going to try that and you did so well and you can do it. Why don't you do it? Are you lazy? So I think we need to realize that our kids want to please us. They want to please their teachers. They want to please their parents. Recognize that your child may have a struggle, and go to the school maybe and say, are you seeing, what I'm seeing? This is what I'm seeing at home. Be open. Try to make a partnership. The school also has to be receptive to a partnership. When I call a parent, I very often say, especially if it's a repeat phone call, listen, I'm not calling to complain about your child. I'm not blaming you. I'm trying to just partner with you. You're part of our team. Let's figure out what's going on together. So parents need to sometimes hear things that are difficult and try not to be defensive about it, and try to be open to the fact of, my child might have an issue. Ultimately, your child. If the school is barking up the wrong tree, you have every right, to say that. But if they suggest an evaluation, can't hurt. You can always go through it, hear what an evaluation says, and reject it. But be open to ideas. Some parents, myself included, have a vision of what kind of school, what kind of community, what kind of group I want my child to learn in. And not all schools provide everything for everyone. So you have to be willing to sometimes hear the hard things, and maybe, even though it's hard to swallow, be open to listening. Realize also your child is not, although in the teen years it may seem like your child is out to get you. A psychologist once told me that, an alien kind of enters the body in the teen years and leaves around 19. And
Oh, boy.
I know you're just starting.
Yes.
And you know what? I used to think, no, not my kids. I have a great relationship with them. And thank God I always did, but that alien was definitely around. But it does leave.
Oh, good.
It does leave.
Julia, I'm sweating over here. Come on. Take it easy on me.
Oh, you're going to be a great dad. You are a great dad.
Thank you.
So, but I had to realize something. My daughter just seemed like she wasn't listening to me. I'd ask her to get ready for bed. I'd come back. She was sitting in the same spot. Eventually, I had her evaluated, an overall evaluation, and they thought there might be some speech and language. There was some ADHD, inattentive, and I had her evaluated with a speech and language clinician. And she had one of the most unique diagnoses that the clinician had ever seen. So she scored in the 94th percentile in expressive language. Woohoo, great, like brilliant. That means that whatever was in her head, she could outperform 94% of the population in expressing it. She also scored in the 9th percentile in receptive language, meaning the way language came in.
Big disparity.
Big disparity. And this has nothing to do with intelligence. People think that disabilities have to do with intelligence. Our brains, when we were created, however that happened, were not necessarily wired for reading. They were not necessarily wired for certain things. So there are many different brains that work differently. That doesn't mean it's inferior, and sometimes to get to the place you need to be, you're using a superior road in your brain. The Shiowitzes, their husband and wife team, did some interesting research on that, where they were able to see what parts of the brain lit up in people with dyslexia. And they actually found that it was a very sophisticated path in order to get to the reading process. So people with disabilities very often are highly intelligent. Their brain just works differently. Mm-hmm. So getting back to parents, what I struggled with is I would say, do this, and it just wasn't done, and I'd get annoyed and like, why aren't you listening? Until I realized even after the testing, she's not able to focus. She's focused on what she's doing. Maybe she just didn't hear me. I mean, she wasn't deaf, so she heard something, but she didn't hear me. So I explained to her, we're going to try something new. I'm going to ask you, what did I just ask you to do? Please don't get insulted. And we started doing that, and it just worked better. She sometimes just hadn't heard me. Mm-hmm. And when she was able to repeat it back to me, it went a lot better. Also realized that kids with ADHD, I know I'm going back and forth, but many of these are comorbid, they happen at the same time, have a very hard time transitioning from one thing to the next. So you may struggle with a child to get into the shower, go take a shower, go take a shower, go take a shower. Then they're in the shower, and you have to say, get out of the shower, get out of the shower, get out of the shower, because once they're in there, they're enjoying it. It's not that they don't want to, it's the transition. So you might want to give your child a warning before you transition. We're at this house, we're going to leave in 5 minutes, finish up what you're doing. We're having dinner in 10 minutes, so finish whatever you're working on. I'm going to ask you to start getting ready for bed, in a few minutes. So, we also don't like being ripped from what we're doing in the middle and having to do it immediately. We like a warning. So I would, just to summarize, listen to experts, ask a lot of questions from experts, be sure that the diagnosis, if there is one, is a correct one. If you don't agree with it, keep asking. Ask the school a lot of questions. Ask your child a lot of questions. And if your child can't answer the questions, you ask questions to a psychologist, to a speech and language therapist, to an occupational therapist, and find out the advice they have.
That's great. Thank you for taking the time to lay that out. A lot of great nuggets in there. In your experience, how do issues in school affect home life?
That is probably one of the most difficult relationships. of a parent expectation of a child. I'm sending you to school. I expect you to learn. I expect you to produce. Come home, give me the production. And if you don't, why not? So I think schools need to be very upfront with parents. As soon as they see that there's an issue, not only in behavior, but in a learning issue, the school needs to share it with the parent, but not just say there's an issue. Here's what we suggest you do about this issue. When we do report cards, in January and June report cards, our teachers write up very, very extensive reports on this is what we're doing, this is how your child is performing, they can do this, they're struggling with that, and this is what we're doing to help them with that struggle. Very often, if you don't understand what school wants from you, go to them and say, my child is struggling, help me, not in an accusatory way. We want to create a partnership. Help me understand what my child's deficits are and how can I follow through at home. What are you doing in school and how can I help that? We have students sometimes who are so far behind in work that they're asked to do independently. We really welcome when parents help us with it. A parent can even help us with it by saying, the home scene is just really difficult. I can't enforce it on my own. I can't go through the struggle with my child. And then we know that we have to do more in school. We actually have a period after school every day called Learning Lab, where students have an opportunity to come to learn or relearn or work on things that they were having a difficult time with, and the teachers are there to work with them one-on-one, or even just do their homework because it's not going well at home.
I know you spoke a little bit already about your personal connection to special education through your children. How has that informed your work?
I think it's made me very, very sensitive, or more sensitive towards it. I don't lightly say this is an issue your child has. I am able also to really understand the struggle that a child is going through or a parent is going through. I spoke about one child who had the speech and language difficulty and ADHD. We chose to try through a neurologist using medication. She didn't feel well all the time. She had headaches. She did do a lot better in school, which raised her self-esteem, because children who are struggling and can't feel like failures. I know I keep saying that, but they feel like they're failing. And it does lower their self-esteem, and they feel stupid and they feel incapable. So she was succeeding. At a certain point around 8th grade, she felt that she didn't want to do this anymore. And the struggle through high school was a struggle. I mean, she managed to get through it. Again, she had the peaks and the valleys. She had a tutor for a month before a Regent and got an 89 after failing the course all year. It was a struggle, and I just had to support her in the struggle, try to help her navigate teachers who didn't quite get it. Now she's doing a master's, and she has herself, once she started college, chose to medicate herself again. She went to the neurologist on her own. And from a struggling high schooler, she graduated with an almost 4.0 for her BA.
Wow.
And now she's at a 4.0 in her master's. She's still in the middle. My older daughter, who we never really had diagnosed, but it seems like she had some inattentive issues. Before she began her master's, she came to me and said, I don't know what to do, how I'm going to sit through classes because I try a lecture and I just lose focus. And she was panicking. And I told her, well, you've worked with a neurologist for migraines. You know him. You can explore it. I'll go with you. You can go alone. She did the same thing and sat there through her whole master's as she got A's in course after course saying, I'm not stupid. I really can do this. I know things. And I had to tell her, I felt like a failure at that point, that despite understanding all of this, my kids still felt like failures. So, I think there's a certain pace that if it's not interfering with your life, and if there's something else, some kids do well with an exercise regimen that helps them. If ADHD is not interfering with your schoolwork, then medication's always a last resort. It's not for everyone. If a school can manage your child without medication, great. But once you yourself are hurting from it, or you can't stay in that school because it's preventing others from learning, it's something to consider, and it's also something to reject if it's not for you.
Julia, I know we talked a little bit about your experience dealing with children who have speech and language delays. What sort of challenges, to the extent we haven't talked about this already, have you typically seen in that area, and what do you do for them?
So children with receptive, meaning delays where it's hard for them to take in information, we have to be very conscious. First of all, we dip in after a piece has been taught to make sure that they've gotten the information, that they've retained it, that they understand it, they can use it, they can manipulate the information, repeat it back to us. If they can't, then we have to rephrase it, meaning not repeat it, but state it in a different way. Very often on tests, students get an accommodation from the DOE, the IEP, where questions, directions can be rephrased. So when I look in a classroom and I see, I saw in a particular case this year that a child was getting frustrated because they didn't understand something. And the teacher just kept explaining it. And then they finally said, okay, I got it. Because they just, like, they were done and they were just hearing it the same way. We were able to work together with a very receptive teacher and understand that you try to bring in real life situations. Even geometry, let's say, if they're not getting a right angle and something, an adjacent side, you can have them picture a tree and a path in a park with a gate, and then have them actually get up and move around and, stand adjacent, stand next to, stand across, things like that. So we try to get them involved physically if we have to. We also have to chunk and break down information, and this works for parents at home also. Don't give 5 directions. Give 1 at a time. Work up to 2. We also, scaffolding is when you give a little piece of information, and then next time you introduce a little more and review the old one until it builds on the information. For students who have it in there somewhere and can't bring it out, sometimes you need to use things like graphic organizers where you lay it out for them, where you give them sentence starters so that you're giving them a place to start and they have to finish, where you start with simple sentences and then expand with adjectives and adverbs. And again, take any advice we get from our speech and language pathologists and go with it.
Julia, I know you've talked about your experience with children who have speech and language delays. Can you talk a little bit about the strategies or techniques that you use with students who present with these issues?
sometimes it's important to note that children or people with speech and language delays also have reading comprehension delays. Sometimes reading disabilities, otherwise labeled as dyslexia, go hand in hand or can happen at the same time. That all has to do with processing information. So sometimes we read together as a class. We'll do a body of work together as a class. Every child has a license to an audiobook library where they can listen to books if they can't process reading it on their own. When we do evaluations, we assess if a child's strength is oral reading out loud, and sometimes we'll let them sit in a room and read a test out loud to themselves, or whether reading to themselves is better than hearing it. We also test for listening comprehension, meaning we'll read something to them and see how they comprehend that, and that's the biggest indicator of how they'll do in a classroom when learning as a whole group.
What's your experience been with regard to the public school system for students who are intellectually intact but who have language or attention issues and need a more supportive classroom environment?
So we've had really great partners with the CSE, the Committee on Special Education Teams, who meet with the school, the parent, and their team to create a plan, an IEP for the student. We give them information on how the student is performing academically, socially, emotionally. The related service providers give input, and they help us craft goals based on our input, and then they provide the services that are accepted, whether it's speech and language, occupational therapy, counseling. They will provide testing accommodations if a child gets extra time on a test, if they need to take the test in a separate location. As I had said before, questions read, directions read. They will also suggest a placement for the students. Sometimes we agree with the placement. Sometimes we don't feel that the child would be able to manage in a larger class. A recommendation of an ICT class where there...
Integrated co-teaching.
Yes, integrated co-teaching class where there is a special ed teacher as well as a general ed teacher. Sounds great, but then the number of students they inform us can go up to 30 students. And a student who's having a hard time focusing in a class with 10 students, if you triple that number, it's even harder for them to focus. Or sometimes they'll give a general ed class with a few periods of what they call sets, which is basically being called out by a special ed teacher once a day. And a child who's like, what should they cover in that period? For a child who's not processing in every subject, it's not subject based. So sometimes that's a challenge, but we really work well together. They do note our concerns and really try to work with us.
And sometimes a 15-to-1 classroom, correct?
Generally in high school now, their recommendation is a 15-to-1. Whereas in elementary school, it would have been a 12-to-1. Once you go to high school, it moves up to a 15-to-1.
Do you find that type of classroom setting is usually appropriate for your students or students who are presenting with the kinds of issues that you've spoken about?
Usually not. Just when you think of the intervention of being not only pulled out for related services, but the ability for our related services providers to collaborate with each other, with the teachers, and be a team, even in that small setting, pushing in. Sometimes we have 2 adults or 3 adults in a room working individually with students to move to a larger setting of 3 times that amount, even with 2 teachers, would be confusing. Again, remember that receptive language where you hear blah, 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 or ADHD, if you think of that as trying to focus on something when you have a radio, a TV, and screaming outside the window, that's what it's like for an ADHD child. It's difficult.
What makes a good special education teacher, in your opinion?
A good special education teacher has to know that they are teaching a child. You know, I said this, they are not teaching a subject, they're not teaching a curriculum. While that's very important and they have to keep their eye on the prize of what needs to be accomplished, very much like a parent when you're working day in and day out with students who can be challenging because they're frustrated, not because they're trying to get to you, not taking things personally, keeping even keeled. When I say non-emotional, I don't mean, to be a robot, but I mean don't take it personally. When a child is attacking you, very often they're attacking themselves. You just happen to be the person there at the moment where they're practicing their target practice on. You have to be able to go with the flow. You might have a plan, kind of like I said earlier in my class, it just wasn't going. They weren't in the mood. And instead of, I'm brutally honest. Sometimes I go, like nobody, I feel like I'm in here alone and I'm bored. And it kind of makes them giggle. And I, just kind of like they're open with me also that way, because then they can say, I'm just not getting it. You have to build that open rapport where they're comfortable to take risks with you. They're comfortable that you're not going to judge them. They're comfortable that if they try something, it doesn't work, they're not going to be a failure again. But you have to demand a certain set of rigor. These kids are not stupid. These kids can accomplish things. They are going to be viable members of a community, contributing members. They are going to be professionals. And you need to balance that compassion along with expectations and high expectations. But the difference is I have high expectations for you, but I'm going to help you get there. I'm going to hold your hand and help you get there. You're not there yet, but you're going to get there. And if you can't get here, we'll figure out where you're going instead.
What do you think is the proper way to educate a student who is strong in some areas, say English, but weak in other areas, say math?
For many of us, it's a challenge because we're so used to, for so many years, accommodating down, meaning we take our curriculum and we break it down and we figure out how to reach the weaker student. But more and more we're seeing that a student might be weak in reading but really strong in math. Have an analytical mind where you don't have to, you just see the math and you can do it. And so we do prepare material for students like that. We can be doing the same subject and one student is, still getting step-by-step directions on how to process a multi-step equation, and the other student has the steps down and can do it, so we're giving them Regent level questions. We, conversely, someone who's stronger in reading and can't do math, we provide more independent work than someone who maybe needs someone to walk them through the different steps. We can have them doing a response to literature while the other student is still working on details and answering detail questions. Very many people ask me, I teach English when I teach, and I'm teaching essay writing, and in some classes we were bringing in hordes of help to individualize, and I was like, no, we can teach students the overall idea and then individualize what you're up to. You know your introductory paragraph. You can write a thesis statement. Now take that thesis statement and develop your body. You're still working on a hook. You're not even up to your thesis statement. We're going to work with you on that. And each child learns the outline of what they have to do and how to fill the outline out, and then they're up to different pieces. So you can even, in larger groups, smaller groups, individualize, and then students who really need that extra help can come to Learning Lab, do get the pull out, all of the, we'll announce to the related service providers, we're doing a new writing piece, we're doing a new math piece, come into the class, see how the teacher is teaching it so you can pull them out and work with them individually.
Right. Great. Julia, from your perspective, what hope is there for students with these kinds of issues to transition back to a mainstream environment one day?
There are good hopes. We do work with a sister school, a mainstream school in our area, and the students integrate there for phys ed, for art, some elective subjects. They participate in their sports teams. They join their clubs. They go on trips together. They, sometimes there are overnights they participate in. We join them for assemblies and for large pieces. So they do have opportunities to integrate with the mainstream population. In 11th and 12th grade, they also do have opportunities to go in for electives such as psychology, or some students have done nutrition, or other types of studies. Some of our students just completed a real estate course with their contemporaries in our mainstream school. So there are opportunities, and we are seeing more and more results of our students going on to community colleges or regular colleges, going abroad for a year of study after school, and they come back and they are fully integrated, whether they've gone into business or have a career or done various other things. They really all are viable members of the mainstream society.
What questions should parents ask of a school to determine if it's appropriate for their children?
I think the first question, I would say it should start with a statement rather than a question. I think it would behoove parents to be very aware of their child's needs. And very often we set our mind on where we want our child to go, and we'll do anything to get our child into that school. We'll get tutors, we'll go to summer school, we'll, whatever it is, please just take my child into your school. And I often say to parents, why would you want your child to go to a school that you have to beg to take them?
Right.
I would take it from an approach of, these are my child's strengths. These are my child's challenges. What can you do for me? Mm-hmm. What can you do for my child? How can you accommodate my child? I know when a parent comes to me, it doesn't happen often, but it kind of makes me sit up straighter and think, okay, now I'm on the defense. Now, the good news is I have good answers of what I can do for that child. But if the school doesn't, then run. Go find another school. So I think a parent needs to say, these are my child's learning styles and this is what they need. How can you provide that? If it's an elementary school, where do your students go to high school? If it's a high school, what do they do after college? After high school? What kind of jobs have they had? What, your alumni, what are they doing now? When this and this challenge comes up, my child gets frustrated. What do you do, when a child is frustrated? I have a hard time. They won't do work at home, and it's not worth the struggle in the relationship. I'm telling you that in advance. What can you do for me? And sometimes we'll have to say to the parent, we can do this and this, or we say, we're not so sure if this is the right fit, but we're not going to leave you hanging. We're going to help you look for the right fit.
So important to be discriminating in that way, right? To have realistic expectations up front. First of all, knowing who your child is, strengths and weaknesses, and then asking these important questions of the school to understand how they work and what they can provide, and then making a decision that matches the strengths and weaknesses of your child with the abilities of that school, correct?
100%. They are your most precious commodity. You want to put them, in a place that's safe, where they're going to feel nurtured, where they're going to be able to grow, where they're going to feel successful. And that doesn't mean easy, because I don't think people feel successful when they're just given the easy way out. People feel successful when they're challenged and help to reach their goal.
Yeah, and I think you're hitting on something here, because I know I've spoken with lots of parents who want a certain placement. They want to see their child succeed in a certain type of placement. And it may not necessarily be the right type of placement for that child. And so, if you shift the focus or frame it in the way you're suggesting, right, what does my child need to succeed? That's a great place to start from. It's kind of for what you were saying earlier about reverse engineering or backward planning, or whatever term you used.
Backward design.
Backward design, thank you. You want your child to end up in a successful place. And so figuring out what is it going to take to get my child to that place. Do you agree?
100%. Right.
How do you define success for the population you work with?
Success is realizing that I don't mean me, that they should walk out with, I am capable, I understand what I need to succeed, I can succeed.
I'm just smiling because my kids, they're turning 3 years old, and they're in school and they have this song, I am capable, I am capable. And it's just so important for every student to believe that, right? That they're capable and they're in a program that's conducive for them, for their success, and for them to know that with the right adjustments and the right tools and strategies and techniques, they can succeed.
You're right. I have a 2-year-old granddaughter, and she has been verbal for at least the last 6 months. She's pretty, advanced verbally, and I'm not saying this because it's my granddaughter, because at one point my daughter said, I'm a little scared. Is there, she's also in special ed. Is there something going on? Is this normal? And I said to her, very much depends on where she goes to school. Either they will develop, yes, she's very bright. Will they develop her talents, her abilities, or will they squelch it? Mm-hmm. You have to choose where she goes to school very carefully. If she doesn't fit into the mold of what they want, maybe she'll be squelched. How many toddlers or little kids do we see who are precocious and verbal and creative and create all kinds of towers and Legos and pictures, and then they come to school and they have to sit in their rows and learn certain things. And thank God more and more educators and more schools are changing. But that's true all the way through high school. Chances are, the same little girl is quite active. Will she have ADHD? Will that mean that she's, smart but can't sit still? what will that mean for her?
What a job teachers have. Seriously. And my wife is in education, a teacher and a school director. And, I see this from so many different angles, given my profession and now as a parent. But the job of a teacher to understand that child and tap into those unique talents and give them the tools to use those talents, not squelch them. What a responsibility teachers have.
It's true. And I'm still learning this day by day. You would like to say that you understand every student and that nobody gets under your skin. But I feel such success. Sometimes a school guidance counselor will come to me and we're having a really hard time with a kid and we're ready to say, we can't do this anymore. And they'll come and advocate for the student. And I go, keep advocating. I want to see your point of view. Keep showing me. And just recently, there was someone that I didn't see it. And then there was a day where there was some interaction. I stood up for him because he was right. It totally changed the relationship. I see the child completely differently. So it's not easy, but we're constantly striving. You have to constantly hold yourself to a higher level and have so much patience and believe, just believe that they can do it. Believe in them and help them believe in themselves.
That's powerful. Wow. Julia, how do you view the parent journey raising a child with special needs and navigating the special education process?
I'm going to repeat the theme. Remember, people are born with an innate desire to do well, an innate curiosity, an innate ability to succeed at something. It might not be what we envision them succeeding at, but they have that ability. I think at a certain point, we really have to stop and listen to our kids who may not be able to verbalize. So when I say not listen to their articulation, but listen through what is setting them off or what they're struggling with, and being able to take your hopes and dreams for them and not give up, just adjust and change it. How to find, if a kid was sick, we would go to every doctor in the world and try to figure it out. We have to change the paradigm, our mindset from thinking that a learning disability or ADHD is something someone